This morning I want to tell you about an experience that I had when I was in college. I had this professor, Dr. Green, and Dr. Green was not a really hard professor necessarily in class, but he gave an extreme amount of homework out, at least what I thought was an extreme amount of homework. So just for one class period, every class period was due about 30 to 40 pages of reading, which isn't that much, and a 5 to 10 page paper on the reading that you read for just that one class. And the problem with that was I had him for 2 classes, 2 semesters in a row. And so for one class, for one professor, for both classes, when I did the math, it equaled to about 250 to 300 pages per week I had to read, and about 30 to 50 pages per week I had to write for one professor. Now, I had other professors and other classes who gave other homework on top of that homework load, but it was kind of tough to get through all of that. And then also when I was in college, I started dating who's now my wife. I started dating Rebecca, and we know when you're in college, I guess at any time in your life, when you start dating somebody, you have to carve out time for that person. They expect you to be available at times to go on dates and things like that, and so I found myself having to find time to date my wife and who was going to be my wife, and I had to find time to do my homework. And then when you're dating, you have to have money, so I had to get a job to support my dating. And so I had this job, and I was working, 30 hours a week or so. So now I'm balancing this job and my, my social game and my homework, right? And then also I was studying to become a pastor. So I was working at churches. I was volunteering with youth groups. I was writing messages for a youth group and planning games and doing things with church, which also took a lot of time. And it wasn't long before I realized one week I started thinking about how much did I sleep this week? And when I thought through it, I was sleeping about 15 to 20 hours per week. That's what I was sleeping, and which averages about 3 hours a night. Now, some nights there was no sleep, and some nights there was 7 hours, but I wasn't getting very much sleep, and I noticed about 2/3 of the way through my first semester of that load of workload that I'd brought on myself, that I started getting these dizzy spells, where I would be working, I'd be at work, and I'd be doing my job, and then that dizzy spell would hit, and I'd have to sit down for a second and kind of gain my bearings, or I'd be doing homework, and I'm drinking coffee and caffeine and trying to keep myself awake, and I'm having a tough time focusing, and the words are moving around, and then I started getting sick. On a fairly regular basis, I would get sick and have to kind of sleep for a little bit to feel better. And I took on myself this really tough workload. And instead of carving out time for rest, I filled those moments with other work and things to do. And so today we're going to look into the book of Exodus because I think that this is probably something that resonates with a lot of us. That we find ourselves at times in our lives, or maybe we're in that time in our life where we're just really, really busy. And it's tough to find that moment of rest. It's tough to find that moment of Sabbath. And if you're like me, you need a reminder like what we read out of the book of Exodus. You need this reminder in the midst of busyness. And this is what God says in the book of Exodus chapter 20. It's in the middle of the 10 Commandments. And God says this: remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and he made it holy. So if you've been going to church for a while, you've heard of the Ten Commandments. Even if you haven't come to church very often, or maybe you're just now starting in church, the Ten Commandments is not an unfamiliar concept for people. They've made movies about it. I mean, we know that in the Christian faith, we have these commandments, and that there's 10 of them, and there's like, you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't steal, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, and by the way, you need to rest. It's the fifth of 10 commandments to keep the Sabbath day and keep it holy. It's the fifth of 10 commandments. And so when we look at, these 10 commandments, these are kind of the biggies for us. There's a lot of things that the Bible tells us to do. There's a lot of ways that the Bible tells us to live. But when we look at the 10 commandments, we kind of hold those a little bit more sacred. They're the 10. They're the biggies. They're the ones we want to try to follow. And it's tough for us as a culture when we look at our culture and we try to reconcile this idea of taking a day of rest and all the things I have to do in my workload. When we look at our culture and even the way technology has advanced, technology has advanced so that we can produce more in our lives. And the more that technology advances, the more we can control, the more we can do. And I've seen it, and I've done it too. When I'm standing up here and I'm preaching, and I'm looking out at the crowd, and then somebody's, their phone buzzes. They got to check the text because they don't want to miss their appointment. Or even when I've sat out there and Pastor Dave's up here preaching, and my phone buzzes. You want to make sure that you're not missing something, that something's not going on. And so technology has made it so that even when we are at home with our families, when our phone buzzes, we go to work. And whether it's texting or whether I'm making an appointment for work or I'm doing an email or whatever it is, it's like I can never separate it from it. And the good thing about it has made us extremely productive. We are a very productive society. We are a very productive culture because our technology advances and it creates more ways for us to produce. So when we look at that, we're like, man, it's almost really convenient for us to be busy. And then we look at scriptures like, I command you to Sabbath. It's tough to reconcile those two things. When you think about how much we can get done in a day. Think about how much you can get done in a day, in a single day. You can get so much done. It almost seems unrealistic to take a day of rest. It feels like a waste of a day. I remember a couple of winters ago when we had that great big snowstorm. And the power was out everywhere, and we couldn't come into work because the power was out. And I remember just kind of spending time with my son and making snowmen and things like that. And then the next day, when it's time to go back to work, I remember looking back and go, man, I just wasted the whole day yesterday. I didn't get anything done. It feels like a waste of a day when we're not using the technology that we have to produce all the things we want to produce. So we're in this teaching series, Why? And through this series, we've tried to answer a lot of questions pertaining to our belief and our faith and why we do what we do. Why do we take communion? Why do we baptize and things like that? And it's been a really great series. I think as I've sat and I've listened, I think I've gleaned a lot in my own life. And as I've talked with folks, out in the lobby, and people seem to really like this teaching series. So if you've missed some of the teachings in this series, guess what? They're on demand. You can go on our website. You can look up the series. And I want to encourage you to do that because there's some great teachings in this series that you can watch. And if you're going on vacation in the coming weeks, it's summer, you want to go to the shore, you're in luck because we live stream every service. So you won't miss any more of the teachings in this series. But you don't want to miss in this teaching series why. It's so important. So today what we want to answer is the big why question we have today is, why do we Sabbath? Why does God command us to Sabbath? Why is Sabbath such an important thing for us? And here's the easy answer. The easy answer is when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, here's how he responded. He responded like this. He said, well, the greatest commandment is this, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul, with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He said that's the most important commandment, to love your God, to love others as you love yourself. And we look at that last part, love your neighbors as yourself, and sometimes we think of that like it's the golden rule, like do unto others as you want to have done unto you. But that's not what Jesus is saying in this commandment. He's saying love others as you love yourself. while you're loving yourself, love others. In fact, what Jesus is doing is he's saying that love for God is directly connected to love for others as well as love for yourself. He's saying at the measure that you love yourself, use that measure to love other people. So what God wants for you, what Jesus wants for you to do is to love yourself to the max. Because when you love yourself to the max, you are able to love other people to the max. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's what he's saying. And then Jesus goes on to explain that under this commandment to love God, to love others, to love yourself, all the other commandments, all the other laws, all the other things that are written in Scripture to guide you in how you live your life, all of that can be summed up in that statement: to love God, to love others, and to love self. And when we look at this commandment to Sabbath, we can see the Sabbath is the fifth of 10 commandments, and it is summed up in that: to love God, to love others, and to love self. Ultimately, when we take care of ourselves, when we find ourselves in places of Sabbath and rest and restoration and connection with God, when we take care of ourselves, it puts us in a much better position to care for others. And that is worship to God. That's what Jesus is saying when he says what the commandments are, and that's what God is saying when he institutes the commandment of Sabbath. But the hard thing is that our culture doesn't really allow for this. Our culture doesn't really allow for this. I was reading, and Keith Drury writes this. This is a direct quote. He says, "We are addicted to hurry. We rush from one double scheduled appointment to the next, making a quick call on our cell phone to cover our late arrival. We dash around panting so that everyone knows that they should not interrupt us because we are too busy. Someone asks, 'How's it going?' And we respond, 'Oh, I'm just so busy.' Sometimes, listen to this, sometimes we wear our busy schedules as a badge of honor. Look at how much I'm doing. Look at how busy I am. Hey, you want to know? I'm too busy. I got to get this done. I got to work on this. I got to do that. I had this pastor that I worked for in Oklahoma very early on in my ministry. I'm an up and coming pastor. I'm learning, and he's kind of mentoring me and guiding me. And I remember every time I walked into the church building, he was there, and every time I left, he was there. I don't think there were very many times at all that I walked into the church and he wasn't there, working on something, doing something, visiting somebody, writing something, reading something. I mean, he was constantly just go, 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 go. And I remember talking to him about our, what the schedule of a pastor is like, and he would tell me more than once. He said, "Nick, this is what I do. I just go and I go and I go and I go and I go, and then I get sick one day and I sleep for 24 hours, and then I wake up and I go and I go and I go and I go and I go." Wow. So this pastor just works and works and works until his body can't work anymore. And then he takes a nap, and then he keeps on working. And even growing up, when I was a kid, and my dad's a hard worker, and my dad taught me to be a hard worker, and my dad is one of those guys that's constantly on the go. He's always doing something. And I remember when I was a kid, people would ask him, "Man, don't you ever sleep?" And my dad would say, "I'll sleep when I die." That was his big saying, "I'll sleep when I die." And I think, man, how off are we? How off are we when the only Sabbath we get is when we're sick or dead? The only Sabbath I get is when we're sick or dead. And I think, man, there's times in my schedule where I'm working so hard that, getting a little sick doesn't sound so bad because I know I'm going to get to rest. I have an excuse. And maybe you're like that. Maybe you can identify with that thought that you just work and work and work until your body can't do it anymore. And the interesting dynamic that we have here is that God commands us to rest, but we boast in our disobedience of that. He commands us to rest. He says 1 day a week, you need to stop and rest and connect with me and connect with your family. But there's many of us, and I'm throwing myself into that that walk around. They were like, I haven't had a day off in 4 weeks. Like it's a good thing. And listen, I'm not saying hard work is a bad thing. Hard work is a very good thing. It's very valued in our culture, right? Hard work is valued in any culture. And I know that when you're working hard, people value you for the hard work that you're putting in and for what you're producing and what your output is. And when people around you are working hard, you value that in them. And so hard work is a really good thing, but it becomes a bad thing when it becomes selfishly motivated. When you're working for yourself, when you're working yourself to death, when you're separating yourself from what's important because of your hard work. And we say a lot of things to make ourselves feel better, right? I'm working this hard for my family so I can support my family. But what if your family hasn't seen you in 4 weeks because you've been working so hard for them? Are you really working for them? When your hard work drives a wedge between you and your family, when your hard work drives a wedge between you and God, between you and your friends, between you and your spouse, then the only person you're working for is yourself. And that's where hard work can become sinful. That's where it can become selfish. That's where it can become not of God. So I don't want to mince words. I want to say something that's really clear here. This is what Scripture says. That refusing Sabbath is sin. Refusing Sabbath is sin. And I know there's a lot of thoughts about what sin is, and so whatever sin is for you, that's what refusing Sabbath is. Refusing Sabbath is sin. And that's a stressful thought. That's a stressful thought because we get it when we're looking at the 10 Commandments. You know, we get it, like where it says, thou shalt not murder. I get that. I'm not going to go kill somebody. You know, it's morally wrong. It's ethically wrong. It's God commands me not to do it, so I'm not going to do it. Thou shalt not steal. Right? We get that. We know why that's wrong. We understand that. You should take a day to rest. Oh, that one's tough. And yet he says it in the same speech as murder and stealing and rest. They're all in that same area of Scripture. They're all there together. They're all part of the 10 Commandments. They are all equal in importance. But what we like to do is we like to take Sabbath out of that and we like to put it over here, and it's okay if I work a little extra or I do a little bit more or I never rest at all. It's not that bad. It's not like I killed somebody. And what God says is, no, it is. It is that. It's that important because you're killing yourself. So if you don't get it by now, if you haven't heard this yet, this is what I'm trying to say is you need Sabbath in your life. If you don't have Sabbath in your life, you need to get Sabbath in your life. It's important. And Jesus models us for this. Like, how do we Sabbath? Jesus models this for us. Jesus himself would take personal retreats. Jesus himself would separate from his ministry, and he would go up on mountains, and he would go to desolate places, and he would go to places where there's not a lot of people. He would even sometimes send his disciples away and go spend time by himself. It was so important that even Christ, who's filled with all of the power of the Spirit and can do all of these things and can perform all of these miracles, and yet even Jesus sees the importance in taking time to spend time with God by himself. In fact, there's a story in Scripture where Jesus, he gives his power to the disciples, right? And he gives them the power to drive out demons and to heal the sick and to make the blind see and to do all these things, to raise people from the dead. He gives them all of these powers, and he sends them out and says, I want you to travel town to town to town and to minister to people and to teach them about God and to show them who God is through these miracles. And so they go out and they spend time working really hard, and they're traveling and they're healing people and they're ministering to folks, and they're raising people from the dead, and they're driving out demons, and they're doing all of these things. And when it was time for them to come back, they all came back. And this is what Scripture says in Mark chapter 6. It says, the apostles returned to Jesus and told him that all that they had done and taught. So I imagine that they're a little bit excited. I mean, if God gave you the power to do all of these things, you'd want people to know about it. Hey, look what I can do, and I can do this and I can do this. And so I imagine, the 12 came back and they're like, wow, Jesus, we did this, and Jesus, look at that, and I did this, and did you see what Peter did, and and I raised this person from the dead. And they're probably really excitedly explaining to Jesus all that they had done. And this is what Jesus says in verse 31. He says, and he said to them, come away by yourself to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat, and they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. So they're all amped up and telling them everything that they did, and look at all the work we did, and work. And Jesus says, guys, that's great, man. You did some good work. You guys produced at a high level. You guys did a really great job. Now, here's what I want you to do. Go rest. And we can look at our lives, and we can even look at this week, and I can wrap off everything I did this week and all the work that went in, and you can do the same thing. I mean, we could talk about all the work we did, but where in your life do you sense Jesus is saying, okay, great, good job, man, you're working hard. Go rest. Go rest. Where is that you're addicted to work? Where is it where there's that wedge of what consumes you and what consumes your thoughts and what consumes your mind and all of the work that you do? Where is that is driving a wedge between you and God, and you're sensing separation between you and Him, and you and your family, and you and your friends, because you're working too much? And God is saying, okay, this is the area I want you to rest. Take a day. The word Sabbath, the original Hebrew word for that is Shabbat. And here's what Shabbat means in the Old Testament when the word Shabbat comes up. It means to come to an end, to cease, to stop, to pause. That's the definition of the word for Sabbath. To cease, to stop, to pause. And here's what I want you to notice in this, that these are active commands that are in your control, right? Like, God doesn't force you to stop. He doesn't force you to pause. I mean, He built your body in a way so that if you go, eventually you're going to get sick, you're going to have some ailments, and your body's not going to be able to sustain that, right? He built you that way. But when it comes down to it, it is up to you to make the decision to stop and to pause and to cease. They're active commands that are in your control. So to really experience Sabbath rest, to say, hey, I'm going to Sabbath today, to really experience that, you must make a decision to stop something, to push away from something, to rest from something. You have to be purposeful. And I know how it is. Because when I'm sitting at home, and I've got my laptop right here, and I've got my phone in my pocket, I can just keep on working. And you've been there, when you're sitting on the couch and you're working and you're watching a movie with your wife or your husband or your family, but you're emailing and you're writing this and you're scheduling that and you're doing all your work from the couch, and then your wife laughs at something and looks over, and you go like, oh, but you didn't actually see the scene. You missed it because you were working. You were watching a movie with your family. I mean, it's so easy. It's so easy if you're not purposeful with rest. So here's what I do. Yesterday, I came home from a camping trip. I love camping, man. That is my favorite thing to do. I love to do that with my family. Sometimes I go camping on my own, and I grew up camping, and so it's just something I enjoy, just sitting back by the fire or doing some fishing. And it's in moments like that where we can do a lot of talking with God, and you can spend some quality time with your family. And so when I go camping, I purposely pick a place that I know my phone won't work. I don't have service. And where I won't run into anybody I know. Not because I don't love you guys, not because I don't want to be with you, and I'm not excited when I see you outside of church, and hey, how's your week? Those are good things. But because there are moments where I need to not be Nick the pastor, and I need to be Nick the father, and I need to be Nick the husband, and I need to be Nick the child of God. And so I have to be purposeful to go to a place where my phone's not going to buzz and my computer has no internet so that I can find Sabbath rest. It's important for us to be disciplined in this because it's in those moments of rest that God restores us. So what consumes you? How do you purposely take time to remove that wedge between you and God, to remove that wedge of work between you and your family, between you and your spouse? You know, the other interesting thing when we read about what Sabbath is and when he gives us the commandment in Exodus of Sabbath, he commands us to keep the Sabbath holy. It says he blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. And you know what the word holy means? It means to be set aside for God. That's what it means. So when he said, I blessed the Sabbath day and I made it holy, God is saying that he is setting aside time for you, and what he's asking you to do is to remember to set aside that time and let that time be dedicated to him. And so it's not just being lazy. It's not just taking a day to be lazy, but it's taking time to connect with our Creator so that he can grow us, pour into us, and restore us so that we can go back into the work week. And I get it because it's a significant amount of time. 1 day a week is a significant amount of time. So in college, I got really sick. I went 2 semesters of this just go, and not sleeping. And I got really sick. I woke up one morning towards the end of that second semester, and it was like a half of a golf ball size lump coming out of my neck, which was a little bit scary for me, but I was trying to impress my girlfriend, right? So I was being real macho about it. And I'm like, oh, what's that on your neck? Oh, it's nothing. It's no big deal. It's nothing, right? But she, even before she was my wife, she had this amazing power over me, right? So she was like, no, you go to the nurse right now. And so I obeyed. And so I went to the nurse. Yeah, thanks. It was the only time I ever did that. But I went to the nurse. And the nurse was asking me some questions about my schedule and about what my life was like. And she said, well, I want you to take this test. And the test is only going to take 2 minutes, right? And so she took a little blood out of my finger and she put it on the test. And it only took 10 seconds. It didn't take 2 minutes. It took 10 seconds. And she looked at it. She goes, yep, you have mono. Which I didn't know what mono was. So I was asking her what it was. And she said, here's what happened. You exhausted yourself. Your body is so exhausted that you have mono. You are so sick. And here's what you need to do. You need to go back to your room. Don't go to class. Don't go to your girlfriend. Don't go anywhere. Go back to your room and go to bed. She said, the only way you're going to get better is if you sleep. And so that was the best news I'd heard in a long time. I thought, wow, the doctor's ordering me to sleep. I can do that. I can handle that. And so I went and I slept. And if you've ever had mono, you know that here's how it works. You know, you wake up and you start to get ready for the day, and you get about 5 minutes into that and you can't even keep your eyes open. I mean, you are just exhausted and you stumble your way back to bed. And I tried really hard to continue in my studies and to do my schoolwork, and I'd show up for tests, and the professor would just look at me and say, nope, you can do the test later. Go back to bed, you know. And I had to take a month off of work. I couldn't work for a whole month, which really like dampened my dating life. But I didn't work for a whole month, and I just slept. And you know what the truth is I've never been the same since. I've never been the same since. I don't have the same amount of energy after that as I had before that. I'm not able to stay awake like I was before that. Never since that moment have I been able to return back to the amount of energy that I had. So it has had lifelong effects for me. And I learned an important lesson, that God designed us to rest, not to be lazy, but to dedicate time to Him and time to our families. He designed us that way, the way that our bodies work scientifically. We need that. We need that downtime. We need that rest. The ways our body works relationally, our relationships need that rest. Our work needs that rest. Our family needs that rest. And to dedicate one day a week. And I wonder how much more productive we would be during the week if we actually took that rest. How much more work we could get done if production is something that's of concern to us. I mean, God is telling us 6 days, work as much as you want for 6 days, but for this one day, dedicate it. And you'll be amazed at how your happiness is affected, how your anxiety is affected, how your overall relationships are affected when you reject the lie that maximum production brings happiness to your life and you connect to what is actually important in life instead of replacing it with busyness. I met a pastor one time and he was ashamed to tell me as we were talking and about, where do you pastor? And we were talking about different things and he said, I'm at a point in my life where even my own kids have to make an appointment with me to see me. And I'm unhappy. He was so unhappy because he never took time for what was important in his life. Because here's what has happened, guys. Here's what has happened. Busy has become the fast food that feeds your life. Busy has become the fast food that feeds your life. And in the same way that convenience has replaced nutrition with the drive-thru, it's convenient. Busyness has replaced rest with incessant movement. You are depriving your body of what it needs to function for the sake of getting something done. To the point that we start to even feel anxious if our schedule's not overflowing, if we're not super busy, if we're not running around, our schedule starts to, our bodies, our emotions, we start to feel anxious. So today, here's my challenge for you, and this is a tough challenge. I get it, I know. It's a tough challenge. But my challenge for you is to figure out that way. Be purposeful in your life to carving out that day of Sabbath, to dedicate to God, to your family, and to yourself. I'm challenging you today, if you don't Sabbath, to make that change in your life. Make that change in your life. Set a day aside for your health, for your relationships, for your God. Set a day aside. So we're going to end our time a little differently today. And it might feel a little awkward at first, but what I want us to do is take 1 minute of Sabbath rest. Together, I want us to spend a minute in silence. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to bow your head. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And when you do that, I want you to push out the whirlwind. The whirlwind of all the appointments and everything I didn't get done yesterday that I got to get done today so I can get the things done tomorrow. They need to get done tomorrow, and all the appointments and all of this and the soccer games and the whirlwind that just swirls around. I want you to push that out of your mind. The anxiety that life brings in your life, I want you to push that out of your heart. And I want you to open yourself up to allow God to pour restoration into your soul. And so maybe that's a prayer for you. Maybe you pray and you offer up your week. God, show me where I can find a day. Show me where I can find some rest. Show me where I can find some Sabbath. Or maybe it's not a prayer at all. Maybe it's you just listening to the Spirit move in your life. For this 1 minute, I want you to use it however you want, but we're going to do it together in silence. And when your phone buzzes, ignore it. They can wait a minute. And when that whirlwind gets in, push it out. It can wait a minute to allow God to pour rest in your soul. So let's bow our heads. Let's close our eyes. And I'll end our time together with a word of prayer. God, for some of us, that minute felt like a really long time. And yet at the same time, not long enough. So Lord, I pray that as we walk from this place, God, help us to find those places of restoration in our lives, to find those places of Sabbath as we move forward. And help us, God, to be able to find moments to disconnect from the whirlwind and to connect to our families and even most importantly, God, to connect with you as you pour into our lives peace and hope and strength and restoration. So God, let us not walk from this place without having accepted that challenge, Lord. To find moments of solitude, to find days of rest in your Spirit. So God, we thank you that Sabbath is not just a thought, it's not just a suggestion, but it's actually a command for us to do and a way for us to live. We thank you for that, God, and it is out of our thanks, Lord, that we give of ourselves to you. And so as we take up this offering, God, I pray that you bless the gift, the giver, and it would be used to build your kingdom in this earth. We love you and we give you praise. Amen.